So today we are painting a portrait of this young boy outside in the sunshine in watercolor. So to do my drawing, I'm using a Faber-Castell graphite aquarelle, and it is HB, and this will completely disappear when I go over with water, so we will not see any of my line work in the final painting. It's almost like we didn't sketch it. Very tricky. Otherwise I have sort of a variety of brushes. I'm not going to tell you which ones to use at every point. I tend to use the ones that I'm comfortable with, but these are the ones that I have, and I will be grabbing them for different reasons. So this one is the Princeton Aqua Elite. It is a long round 12, and I really like the long, it's almost like a detailer or rigger brush, but it also has a very thick, fat body on it, and it comes to a very nice sharp point. So I find for larger washes where I want to go between sort of like a thick line to a thin line, or get that really nice sort of calligraphy sort of look to it, I really like using this brush. For some of my washes on larger areas, I like my Raphael Soft Aqua Zero, and I also like this Isabey number 4 Cat Tongue. The brush that I mainly use for most of my paintings is this Raphael Soft Aqua 3.0. It is a perfect size for me to do larger washes, and then as I wet this, the brush retains its nicer point, so I can get very detail work, but also sort of more washy and large body areas. I also have a few detail brushes, so these are both 5.0 Noble. This one's kind of, I think I've used this with acrylic a little bit. It's a little bit worn out. I might just remove it actually. But I do like the Noble brushes for my details, and this is a 5.0, and you can see how nice and tiny that little point is. And then I also have these from China. I don't know what the hell they are. Excuse my language, but they're just nice little detailer brushes. I picked them up for super cheap on Amazon. I can't find them now, but they're amazing. And then I also have a Zero Raphael Precision brush. It's just a little bit of a larger brush for some detail work. So yep, that's what I will use. And then I'm using for watercolor the Mungo set. I did, however, add some colors, and I do really like this blue and these purples. I'm actually going to clean them up. To clean them, I literally just take some water on my brush and just try to, without getting the paint too wet yet, I just try to wipe off the top surface, so that way I get cleaner color mixes as I go. So some of these colors, you can create them on your own. It's basically like various blues or purples with white mixed in. The reason why I like these, they're just really quick and easy, and they're already kind of saturated, so I don't have to worry about mixing so much. But I find that they're really nice to get some bright skylight on my watercolor portraits, and I just really like these colors, especially this very light blue one. And also this purple and this blue are sort of in a similar value, so I find that I can really play with my warm and cool highlights with those two colors. Otherwise, I've put a series of colors down the center that are just a mixed brand bunch. I've got, I think this is the Green Appetit by Daniel Smith. I've got a Payne's Gray here that I use all the time. This one of these here is I think it's called Moonglow by Daniel Smith. There's just a variety. I really like this bright green, bright orange, I don't know. There's just a bunch of colors that I really liked from a variety of packs, but honestly, look for, when you're looking at colors, just look for the undertone in things. Is it more yellow or more red, or is it more, in blues, is it more purple or more greenish? Yellow, red, basically. I'm always looking how far they go, either yellow, red, or blue. So is my red really blue? Is it really purple? I'm just going to clean some of these off. They're getting a bit dirty. So I will go change my water after. cleaner mixes. So I'm just taking off the top little layer. This is handy to do when your paints are still quite dry. It's also kind of wetting them too, so they will sort of hydrate, but at least they're hydrating cleaner. And I always keep a very cheap piece of watercolor paper on hand while I'm painting, because I like to test out my color mixes and how much color I have on my brush and just how it's coming off my brush in general before I put it on my painting, because I don't like surprises. And if we can do that, do it. It's not cheating by any means. You're just taking a step to ensure that you're going to get what you want. I do also, because colors are hard to see when they're dark, so I do also have a color chart, just so, especially my blues, they're also dark, it's hard for me to tell which is which. I will organize these later. This is a bit more green than this is more purple, and this is way more green, so I'll probably put this one over here and move those around, but then I'll have to redo my chart later, so that's fine. And then I've got some of the color swatches on the back. So this would be the green apatite. I really like, this is a single pigment, I think it's P16 turquoise that I just fell in love with. This is the smalt blue, this is that moon color, Moon Glow I think it is, from Daniel Smith, and then I've just got some other nice warms that I quite liked on my palette, and then the Payne's Gray that I put here. So that's the extra colors that I kind of put down the center. I didn't name them, I should do that. Eventually I will name them. So I'm gonna clean off some of this palette. This palette is still quite new, so the color is still beating on it a little bit. I may clean this off and sort of scrub it down with maybe a toothbrush, an old toothbrush, and some baking soda, just to kind of rough up the surface later. But I kind of had a lot of mixes going, so I haven't done it yet. So yeah, now we've got our palette ready, we've got our water, which I will clean, our little sketch done with our soft aqua. The paper that I'm using is the Fabriano Artistico paper. It's 100% cotton. I kind of really like this for portraits. I found it worked really well, and I like the texture. It's got a nice watercolor texture. I like that sort of sensual feel of the paper texture, but I don't like it to be overpowering, because I don't like it to create shadows on my work, because that can kind of dull it and it looks less vibrant. So I do like to have a paper that is 100% cotton with a texture, but less so than, let's see, the Arches, which is kind of really intense and very present. So I will go clean my water and I will be back in a second. Alright, so I am back. I also have a rag on hand just in case, and I have some clean water. Let me see, where do I want to start? I guess, you know, we could do some washes in the background. I do want to watch some of the hair area here. I would like that to stay white. So I'm just going to take this nice cat tongue brush, and I am going to simply wet my page here. I'm very carefully going to the edge of my drawing. So what we will be doing here is a wet on wet technique. And I do want to carefully go around some of those strands. And it's just to grab some of these branches here and to just do some washes in the background. So I don't want this background to be super detailed, I just want the color to kind of move. Okay, so now that that is dampened, I don't need it to be soaking wet, but I do need it to be wet enough that the paint will carry around. So I'm just going to mix up some nice colors here, so maybe some Payne's Gray. And you can actually mix too on your paper. I just make it a little bit more wet. And I'm going to take a bit of this green blue and maybe some purple blues, just to get kind of a nice, not too warm, not too cool color here that can go quite dark. And I'm going to desaturate a little bit with some of that Payne's gray, and I'm just going to, I do not want that on his face. I'm going to just drop this in here. I don't want too much water, so I can just wipe some of that on the page, and then I can just help this to go around where I want it. And I might actually switch brushes because I do want a little bit more control. And put this one to the side because it has some paint on it. So this brush has a little bit less water on it too, so I'm just going to help this paint move around. Might have to mix up some more color here. And I do want some yellows and some warm colors coming in here. Maybe some, I'm going to add some more earthy golds to this so it's not so saturated, but I will let the blues kind of come back in over here later. So if you really want something to look bright white, the best thing to do is put something dark next to it. So some of these little hairs here, I'm just going to allow these blues to be quite dark. And I just want to allow these colors to kind of mix of their own volition. And because that paper is still damp, it should carry this color through and around. So I did start with one of the more dark parts of the painting, but that's just going to help to establish some values and also give me that bright edge for the boy's face there. In this part, I don't really want to care too much about what's going on. They're just going to be sort of like random leaf shapes. I'm going to take this right to the paper edge. And then up over here, I'm just going to go and add some sort of earthy greens. So I'm just mixing some of the golden yellows with my Naples yellow, which has a bit of a white in it. And I'm trying to remain quite painterly just by using the shape of this brush. I do also like the texture of this paper. I find it gives me an interesting blend between sort of dry brush technique and wet technique. And you can add, so right now what I'm doing is adding wet paint on dry paper, but I can go back in after and add more water and let these sort of blend out and sort of mix of their own accord. So I can take this and just wet this because I want it to be nice and soft, and then allow this area to just blend up. And then down in here, it's going a little bit more desaturated. And then I'm going to get into some earth tones, some browns, and some, I might actually mix some browns up into that tree trunk there too while it's sort of drying. So I'll let that sort of continue, and then I'll drop in some extra color before it's fully dry. And again, if you want something to look nice and bright, you put something dark next to it. I'll lay in some color here. And then I'm just going to grab some from my mess here and allow this to blend its own way. Maybe some little branches and things coming in over here. And then as things dry, you kind of get this sort of glazing effect. Oops. I'll drop some water. It's going to give me a cauliflower on there, but I don't actually mind too much. Bring some of this blue in here. And let this sort of mix together as it wants. Just kind of trying to hint at some foliage and other stuff without being too literal. And I've got some cauliflowers and things going here, but I actually quite like that about watercolor. There's one nice one here. I'm going to let that brush stroke be. I'm going to take some of my brown now because it'll be a bit complementary to these blues. And I'm going to drop some in here to make this a little bit darker and a little bit more earth tone. And I want a nice clean edge for his face. You gotta be very careful about that line there. That's where the highlight goes, and if I mess up that shape, I'm not gonna get it back. Just dropping in some color. I'm just gonna let this kind of do what it wants. And again, I'm going to add some up here, but it's kind of drying a little bit. So I'm just going to allow some brush strokes to happen. It'll still it's still damp, so it's still going to softly mix. There's a little cauliflower there I don't really want, so I will kind of go over that again, but And there's that little bit in here. That is going to be his hair. And I think I just want to add some color in these lighter areas, and maybe just very, very soft color. Not too descript, just not white. Come around the head this way. It's going to help me establish an edge for his hair there. Just to kind of warm up the paper in spots. Very subtly. It'll also help soften some of those edges because they're still a bit damp. And also a little bit up in here. That was a little bit too brown. I'm going to get rid of some of this by moving it over. I don't love this cauliflower here. It's a little bit much, so I can just kind of move this out of the way. Grab some water in that warmer color and bring some of that in here. It'll help soften that edge slightly and just warm up the paper a little. Some of these areas I just want a little bit more color. I'm trying to work with what I have here already. It's a cauliflower that I don't love here. It's a little bit much. So I will use my wet brush with a little bit of paint to soften it out. And then I will just go in and add some brush strokes that are nice and loose over it. And then I just want a little bit of color down in here. I'm going to kind of avoid that edge because it's still really wet and I do not want that to bleed. But I do want to warm up the paper a little bit in parts here. And we can drop in a bit more color in spots. Just let that paper do its thing. If I want to add more warmth next to this later, I can do that, but I really need that paper to dry first. So I'm actually going to wait right now, and I am going to let this dry, and I will come back a little bit later. If this is not dry for the next part, and I try to go into the face and hair here, everything's going to move, and I'm going to end up with a mess. So I will see you in a little bit when this is dry. Actually though, before I go, one thing that I want to do before this dries is to just come in here with some paper towel or toilet paper and just kind of remove a bit of this to give a little bit of texturing in this area, just for some interest's sake. It's a little bit dark in spots, so just some soft additional texture. Okay, now I will let it dry. Okay, so I've waited a little bit for this to dry. Okay, so I've waited a little bit for this to dry. It's still wet, but I'm going to work on the inside of the body and to this edge, which is already more dry than this area. And this is where I really like this blue color, so I'm actually just going to take my Raphael Soft Aqua 3.0, and I'll just move this back over, sorry. I'm going to take some of this nice blue color that is quite bright, you'll see on here. So I find that this is sort of the perfect color for my skylight, where the sun, or basically the sky, is reflecting off of everything that is facing upwards. So there's direct light, there's bounce light, and there's indirect light, and there's skylight. And so I find that this is a very good skylight color. And where this turns into shadow subtly, it becomes a little bit, oops, more purple. There's basically what's happening here is there is some bounce light from his skin that's going to be warming up where this comes around. So I can add some warmth into there. And I will take a little bit more of the skylight color very softly. And I'm going to bring this into some of these highlights. And some of the highlights I'm going to keep fairly close to white at this point. And there's going to be some warms it's also coming in, so I do want to leave some space for those. But there are some bright areas of his clothing here that needs a bit of the skylight color hitting it. And there's also some stitching and things, and some other little shadows, so I will add those in now. But I just wanted to get sort of an idea of what my lights were doing in here, because they're sort of my brightest whites, and you want to establish your lights first in watercolor, although you can start with some detail. If, like around the eyes, I sometimes do like to go in with a little bit of my detailing first, because it's such a small area. I find it easier to establish some of those details, and then we'll go in and do the rest. So I'm just going in here and adding some of the shadow color in here. It's going to get deeper than this, but this is sort of like the area that turns out of the shadow onto the lighter part of the shirt. And there's some in here also, so I'm turning into that purple color to give me that shadow. Again, I'll probably have to go darker, but at least I can start just establishing where those edges are. You can layer so much with watercolor. And under the sleeve here, where we've got a lot more bounce light happening, there is, oof, that is very hot. I'm gonna go for a more orange, maybe between the two. Yeah, and then some purple to sort of desaturate that and darken it. And this is sort of in that shadow of where the little shirt comes around. And it's being warmed partially by the light going through the fabric, but also by the warmth of his arm. There's some bounce light happening in there. A little bit of bounce light in here. I'm just going to place it, but I'll have to put some back in there again later. So I'm just trying to mix a fairly bright, peachy tone, and I think that looks pretty good. And I want it to be quite light, so I'm kind of removing a bunch of water from it. But this is going to come up in here. And kind of down the front of his shirt here. Slightly cooler one for a bit of shadow up in here. And some of these cooler colors. Down in through here. And I'm leaving this edge as a highlight. I'm kind of using some of these colors because they've desaturated for me and it's in the background, and I am going down off the canvas. And I'll grab some more of this nice peachy color. It's bright, it's a bit too bright. Remove a bunch of it from my brush. That is too much, so I'm just gonna add more water. I just need to, yeah. I wanna go softer first. And then I will go ahead and add some more blues in here and leave some of that space white for the bright highlights. And I usually balance the whole painting toward the end because it is hard to tell exactly what's going on with all of my values when it's just kind of like patchwork like this at the moment. There's a little detail there on this sleeve that I can sort of hint at and then refine a little bit later. Okay, so now I think I'll move on to the face. I'm going to start with the eyes. So I'm going to take a little detailer brush. I'm actually going to take this paper and just flip it around. Normally when I'm working, I allow myself more space, but because I'm filming, I have sort of a limited area, so that's why I'm doing this. But if you're doing this on your own, you probably should just make sure you have enough space. And if I look at the colors in his eyelids, I'm seeing sort of a... Actually, I need a bigger brush to get my paint moving, so I will take my favorite here. And I know I need some brown. And a tiny little bit of like a red in there, but it's sort of like an earthy color right now. It's like a bit, it's in the shadow, so it's a bit desaturated and yellow, and then it moves in through blues, so I need sort of a range of temperatures with this right now, so I can sort of mix up a variety here. And then so the cooler part I'm going to drop in here. And then I'm going to move through that slightly warmer brown. And then into this much warmer color here. And then we see the white, the lighter part of the underneath of his eyelid there. So I'm going to leave that for now. There's a part after, oops, on the bottom, it's still fairly desaturated, but it becomes more sort of a rosy in color. So I will go ahead and add that. And this is where I really look for temperature changes. So how much more blue, yellow, or red are my colors? That's still a bit too warm, but I can fix that a bit later. It's sort of like a purpley color in here. Not quite dark enough yet, but it can always darken later. And I'm going to just oops, grab a little bit more Payne's Gray here into this mix, just to sort of darken it, because this little line gets a little bit cool in here. In this little shadow. And then this little shadow up here is actually a bit warmer than the other side. There's a little bit more of those pinks in there. That looks really funny on my camera. It looks better on my page. I guess it's just how it is. So the bottom lip, okay, first of all, the top lip, it's very, very subtle, and it's a little bit of a pinkish red, and then it gets a lot sort of hotter. On the bottom lip. So I'm going to paint this little edge first. I don't want to outline fully. If you outline fully, it really stylizes things, and that might not be what you want. If you want something that looks realistic, try to avoid equally outlining. You want to really pay attention to your edges. And I'm going to grab some water because this part actually needs to be very subtle. And then I'm going to take a little bit of this red mix in with my brown mix, so it's a little bit less saturated, and I'm going to add some of my shadow in here from this little area between the Cupid's bow here. It's the fulcrum. And I'm going to go a little bit more red into the nostril because of the subsurface scattering. Okay, so this is something that I do really like about this paper. I have a sort of an outline here which I don't want, and I find this particular paper makes it really easy for me to relift and wet, to move my edges and soften them, but I also find that when it comes to washes, they hold well enough that I can do some glazing. So I find this paper to be very flexible to work with, which is why I kind of, along with the texture, it's why I kind of like it for portraits in particular. So this part of the nose, oops, has a little bit more bright orange to it. Sometimes it looks like a lot, but when you mix it up into some other colors, it knocks it back enough that it's not fully out of place. There's a lot of bounce light in this photo, so it's kind of lighting his nose from underneath. It's almost like a horror lighting, except it's outside. It's partially bouncing off his very light shirt here. And I can actually, I think, do some of the lower part of his mouth right now because I've got some appropriate colors mixed up for it. I'm gonna have to go cooler into those corners, but I can do that after. This is definitely not as dark or intense as I want to go on this, so giving myself room to move still on this one. Just leaving this little spot, that's where it's going to sort of be the little highlight. Right now it looks intense right now because the contrast is so different, but it will make sense in a little bit. And just under the lip here, there's a tiny little bit of pink. Very subtle, that'll be way too much. It's just a little highlight. And in the eyes, in the corners, it always goes a bit darker. So I'm just going to take a little bit of Payne's Gray here. Just to round out the eyeball here. It looks very strange if you leave this completely white. Okay, so I'm going to take my 3O brush now, and I'm going to pay attention. So I actually see some purples mixed with some pinks here into some of the shadows slash highlights on his cheek here. So I'm going to go really light on this first, and this actually comes up into there, so that's good. Just a little bit of this color also facing upwards here. Nice and gentle. And then there's some more sort of oranges coming in through here, and they kind of blend softly, so I want to do this while it's still a bit wet. And then there's sort of like, oops. Oh yeah, that's the right color. It looked different. I think there's some green on it. Naples yellow and white. I need something that's quite light and desaturated. And it also needs to have some pink tones in it. So this is for sort of his overall color. That's way too much. It's a very cool pink, but this will do, I think, right here. So this is sort of going to be his overall coloring. However, parts of it are going to get darker, parts of it will become a little bit more pink, parts will become a little more blue. And I'm wanting to also pay attention to where my lightest lights are. And just soften this out a little bit. Okay, and then as I move up here, there's a little bit more pink. It's a little bit too much paint, so I'm just going to dab some of it away right now. Or it's actually too much water, not paint. And then there's a more purple blue top to that, like in these desaturated tones. I think I can just pick some up here because it's nice and subtle and soft. I'm going to go from that shadow edge first and then pull down into that wet paint there. And then there is some up in here that is kind of pinkish gray. And also over into here. Move it up into here. I'm just looking for all the places where these colors kind of repeat. I've got a weird thing happening here, but I can totally fix that. I need something that's a bit more peachy. There's actually a lot more paint that has to go down still, so I can fix a lot of these little things that aren't quite right as I go, because he's not anywhere near at the top of his value structure yet, so there's still a long way to go with this one. some coolness coming in that highlight under the chin there. And then there's some up in here. I just want to get the paper sort of covered right now. But I'm paying attention to what I'm covering it with, and like the tones and the values. Even though I'm staying on the lighter side than I need to go. I'm trying to notice if there's more blue or more purple or more yellow or more peach, or what color am I looking at? Is it dark? Is it light? Does it start from one color in the shadow and then turn color into the light area? These are all things I like to ask myself and pay attention to while I'm painting these. Okay, so there is, in here, this may still be too wet. So I'm going to start with this little, there's like a tiny little shadow coming across here that follows around his cheek that's a bit darker. So I'm just going to add that in. And then it kind of fades around. So I can let it fade first. I can always go darker later. Okay, that's better. So now I can add some of this into here and sort of get the volume of his nose starting. And that was a disaster. Just gonna dab this off. There is a spot on his nose that goes through sort of a purple magenta and then into that blue color. To purple magenta. into my very light sky blue color on the top of his nose there. Alright, I'm gonna go do the neck. There's more burnt umber, which is a sort of, it's actually Van Dyke that I have. It's not burnt umber, but it will still work. It's sort of a yellowy brown. The Van Dyke is a bit less yellow than burnt umber. So if I need more warmth in some of it, I can add a bit of, what color? Maybe just some of my Naples to that. Maybe a touch of an orange too. This one is quite saturated, so it needs to be a little bit less saturated than that, so I'm not quite happy yet. And I do need some more warmths in there. I think that's the other problem. I think it's still too... This part is the darker part anyway, so I can sort of trial the color here. That's better. Hey everyone, so I took a little break and went to Australia, so I've taken a little hiatus from this particular tutorial for now, but I really want to finish it because I feel like it's turning out to be a great little painting. As you probably noticed, I have adjusted my palette since I left because I was painting these beautiful little pieces of Australia when I was away. For example, I did a couple galah, pink galah, and then now I'm working on these koalas, and I've got a few more sketches ready to go for these. And I just want to make sure that my palette that I have is universal enough for essentially any situation. And so to do that, I try to make sure that all of my color range bases are covered. So I want to make sure that I have colors that are in the purple spectrum or blue-purple spectrum. So this one is more to the red, this one is more to the blue, but I've got some nice purples in here. This is even closer to the blue, but you can see between these two blues, this is more green. So I'm working over here towards the greens and then yellows and then reds and then earth tones. And I like to organize my palette this way just so it's a little bit logical, and I'm clumping things together that go together so that when I mix on my palette, I can use the sides that are adjacent and kind of keep everything organized. So I've got my sky colors over here, and then I've got my more blue, I've got some purple blues happening here, and then some more green blues happening in here. I've got my bright greens in this area, and then my more earth tone greens here as we're moving this way across the palette. This is an error I will get rid of. I think I just grabbed the space, but this should really be reserved for my bright reds over here. On this side, I have some earth reds, so I've got more of my browns and earthy tones mixed. On this side was more of where the flesh tones were going to be going, so I've got more of my pink reds. I could have switched this, but it doesn't really matter too much. It's just kind of how it happened while I worked. Over here, I've got some shadow mixes, and then yeah, so I need a space here for my bright, shocking reds. I just wasn't using any in the last painting, so I will end up cleaning this little area and then using this space for these red tones instead. So you can kind of see how I'm working adjacent to where the things are placed. And so you don't need to have the same colors as your teacher or whoever you're following. Your palette is very personal, and the minute you understand why someone builds their palette the way they do, the more confident you're going to be at picking your pigments. For example, I added a burnt umber because I felt like in the initial palette breakdown I had too many of these earth tone reds. There was this one that came with it, but I was sort of missing, and then this one is quite yellow, but I was sort of missing something in the middle, so I ended up getting the burnt umber. I also added Payne's Gray, which I had last time. I can't live without Payne's Gray. I use it in so many situations. And then I also added the Moon Glow from Daniel Smith, which is sort of like Payne's Gray, except it's more to the purple spectrum. So I can get really nice shadows, and it kind of granulates different colors. So there's actually quite a bit of purple in here, and then you see actually there's little hints of teal and some blues, and then there's some reds even, and then some grays. It's just a really beautiful color. It's very rich and diverse, but overall it reads as sort of a purple shadow color. I also added the Genuine Appetit from Daniel Smith because it's like, this is one of my favorite bright greens. I don't remember what it is, but you can easily find something in whatever brand. You just want to look for a bright green that is neither too blue nor too yellow, sort of a midway between, and very bright. I find this works really well for fresh foliage. And so the Green Appetit has that color in it a little bit. It's a bit darker, but it's sort of similar. But it also granulates with sort of a warm rust color that's sort of similar to this, or maybe even sometimes to this. So it almost looks like rust on top. And then I've got these more pure earth tone colors. And then so I've got too many turquoise or teals right now because I absolutely love teal. I don't need this many, but I absolutely love those colors. If I were to keep one, I would probably keep this one because it's a little bit brighter than this one. I'm going to keep both for now. I might swap it out later if I find something else more interesting. And I also added a teal just to have something really bright because I knew I was going to be painting a lot of coastal scenes in Australia, and in the surf, in the waves, there is often colors when the surf turns over. There's colors that are very similar to this teal. So I just really wanted a teal on my palette, a couple extra shadow colors to open up the brown side and add some more purple blues. And this is a smalt blue that I absolutely love. It's quite purple. Ultramarine is generally one of the most purple blues. However, the smalt is quite a bit more purple than the ultramarine. So I do like to have that as a little go-to on my palette. Obviously I could mix this and this and come up with something similar, but sometimes I like the shortcuts. Another quick lesson, if you're looking for pigments, not every brand names their colors exactly the same. Some have sort of proprietary names for their colors, but every tube of paint should somewhere have a pigment code on the back. So this one is made up of Pigment Blue 28, so PB28, PW18, which is Pigment White 18, and PG7, which is Pigment Green 7. So if you want to buy single pigment colors so that you can make some of these, you could just pick up one of each of those. It will warm up, it'll open your palette so you've got a blue, a green, and a white. And then you can easily make this color. So that's how the colors work. For example, this is my Cadmium Red Deep, and this one is a single pigment color, and it is PR108, so Pigment Red 108. So you will find in a lot of mixed colors in tubes on the market, Pigment Red 108, and you will know that that is Cadmium Red Deep. So sometimes you don't need to buy all of the colors. You can buy single pigment colors. And then if you want to mix a color, you can go to the website and look at the pigment code to find out what is in that specific color, and you can mix it yourself with your single pigments. And that will generally also give you more pure mixes and brighter, cleaner mixes. That said, sometimes, like these ones, they're just such good shortcuts that, you know, it saves time and heartache, and I like using them pure like this, typically speaking. So that's a little bit about color philosophy. I know we've gone through this before, but I just wanted to go through it again because I did update my palette. I don't remember what orange this is. I just loved it because it's really, really bright. Again, like this green, you can easily find something like this on the market. It doesn't matter if it's the same one, just look for something that's really bright. You really don't have to have the exact same colors as your teacher to get very similar results in your painting. So with all of that aside, let's continue our portrait. Alright, so I mentioned that I needed to clean this little area of my palette because on this painting I want to really warm the face to make a really nice, sunny, warm glow. I haven't gone far enough yet, but I did kind of usurp this space with my green. So I'm just taking a damp paper towel and I am just gonna wipe this down. I did score my palette. You can see a lot of scratch marks in it now. If you're putting paint on a new palette, it beads up and it sometimes can drive you nuts because you can't really see the colors that you're mixing. So I did score it with just some sandpaper, just so that my colors were staying put. So you'll see that they slide around a lot less now. And let's see, I want to tackle, I'm going to take maybe some of this bright yellow with some of the Naples yellow. And I'm also actually going to add a little bit of this orange in. So I'm just going to clean my white off here a little bit because it's got some colors on top that I don't need. They're too cool. Oops. So I just kind of, sorry, my water is here off screen a bit. So I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. And of course I'm going to take some test paper here, which I forgot to grab. Always keep test paper. I find it just gets rid of a lot of headaches for me when it comes to testing out my colors. So I'm just going to take some of this white now and knock this back a little bit, and I'm going for a very light sort of orange yellow glow. So a little bit more of that. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. And I am just going to take this and do a little wash over the boy's face. So again, I really want to watch though where things become warm and cool. So this is just going in the warmer areas. And I can actually take off the paper. I've got sort of an interesting mix there. Just where the sunlight is kind of hitting and bouncing up onto his face. It's a nice bright white area here. And then there's going to be a little bit more of this yellow coming down into here. I'm also using my 3.0 soft aqua brush that I love so much. And I do need some more of this up in here. So in going over some of these edges too, they will soften, which is nice. I want nice soft edges on here, so this is one way of doing it, just going back over. And then this just gives me some general color and warmth across his face. Nice sunny day. I'm going to take a bigger brush also, so I will take the soft aqua. I think this is a 0 size. I'm going to mix up a little bit more color here. I guess I could do it here. Oops, too much. Don't forget though, we're going to add white, so sometimes it seems very intense until we knock back the saturation with our white. And I'm going to take a nice soppy wet brush, and I'm basically going to glaze. That's a bit much, but I'll let it sort of do its watercolor thing. And I just want to glaze some nice warm lights into this background here. I like the colors that I put down, but I feel they're not sunny enough. So you can totally add extra colors over, and it's called glazing. And you see how it sort of changes the tones a little bit, or the hue. Getting some of that nice sun into this painting. Okay, so on the top of the head too, there's some area here that I will leave white. So I'm actually just going to start brushing in just some undertones of this sunny color where the highlights are hitting his hair. Just to get some color movement through those whites there. And there's also a little bit on the ear here, but this is going to get a lot darker, but I don't want to neglect that area. Some of the hair becomes a bit more ashy also, and a little bit of sun onto the top of his ear here. Maybe some down into here. Just a little bounce light onto his nose there. A little bit more intense on the cheekbone where it's bouncing up from his shirt. And then again, of course, we want to bring some of this into where the light is hitting on his t-shirt. So I am going to let that dry. I'm going to take my smaller 3.0 soft aqua, and I am going to do his eyes. So he's got kind of like gray blue eyes, and actually there's some browns in there. It's a bit the way the light's hitting it. It's hard to tell from this photo, so I'm actually just going to mix up some Payne's gray first. Very light amount. It's perfect. And I am going to just do a first little draft of color here. It looks funny so far, but we'll fix that. It's always about building up those layers. And then I'm going to let this dry, and then we will come back in a few minutes. So at this point I actually do just take a break because the paper is too wet for me to continue. And if I start layering on top of this, I'm going to unsettle what I've just put down, and I want that to stay. So I'm going to take a quick little break, and I will be back in a few minutes. Now that my paper is dry, I want to tackle some of the areas of the hair. Just because I'm finding this whole white area still to be quite distracting, and I don't need to go into details yet. So I'm just going to mix up sort of more of an ashy. So in his hair there's like there's yellow tones, and there are blue tones, and there are gray tones, and sort of earth brown tones. And I've got sort of a pile starting here, but I want to add some of these colors in here. So actually, like, this is exactly where I see maybe I could use some of my Payne's Gray, and I could use some of my that moon glow for some of the purples, and then there are some warmer reds. So overall, let me see, I'm just going to take this color. That's a bit too ashy. This is actually a little bit better, and then there are some yellows that are a little bit deeper. Actually, mixing up this pile kind of gave me the perfect color. So I'm going to use this pile off of my paper, and I'm just going to lay in some of these areas that are brighter color, but still darker than this side. When I move in toward the light, it warms a little bit again, so I can add some more reds in there, but for this, right now, I'm just going to make sure that I've got some sort of darker yellow highlights. I did go over his beard here, which is really what I wanted, so I'm just going to take my brush with some water and just kind of clean that up. So this yellow, again, I'm just going to bring this over. This is actually going to become more of the darker color in here. And I want to stay loose with these strokes. I don't want to paint every hair. I just want to sort of hint at these hair sort of clumps. It's kind of nice tousled hair, like he's been playing outside in the sun for a while. So I'm just gently using my brush, kind of letting it dry brush sometimes to get that texture in. There's some areas in here where I have a line right now and I should not have one. I'm actually just going to kind of work this out. So one thing that did happen in Australia when I traveled is that I had these color mixes already done, and they're since no longer on my palette. That's okay, because I've got to a point where those layers are consistent. I just want to make sure my edges are kind of soft so that as I mix new colors that could be appropriate to these areas. They don't have to match exactly. So I just want to get rid of this little edge here for now, between that hairline and the forehead, just because I don't want a hard edge there, and I'll go back in later and sort of touch that up when I add other layers of color. The values are still really off on this painting, that's why it looks so weird, but as we work towards the foreground and the darks on the layers, it's going to make a little bit more sense. Alright, so in here I'm seeing actually a lot of sort of brown yellows, but they're a little bit more peachy than what is a standard sort of burnt umber. So I'm just going to take some of these peachy ones that I've already mixed, and that kind of gives me a perfect color right here, but I maybe need a little bit of Naples yellow in there to help carry that into the setting tones, and I think that that is about perfect. So right along his jaw here, there is a little shadow that kind of defines his jaw. And this comes down, and then there is another couple lines. So one coming into where his neck kind of folds in here, and then one coming into just under his shirt here. I do want these edges to fade out, so I'm just going to clean my brush, and it's just damp, it's not soaking, there's not a lot of water, and I'm just going to take this and just kind of pull it out sort of across his neck here. So I'm getting sort of a hint so far of those lines, but it's a lot softer, and then I can go back in later and add a little bit more detail to those. But I just want to start darkening that area so that we can feel it. Also inside his ear it gets really warm and darker, so I'm going to add some more of these brown colors to it, or the reddy browns to it. And again, like if I were to mix this color from scratch, I realize I'm using pre-mixes, but I would just grab any of these colors and kind of make a bit of a mess in similar tones, and then test it, and then check with my reference and see how close I am. And then I warm it, cool it, brighten it, or darken it from there, or even sometimes it needs more saturation. So you just kind of have to get used to sort of looking at what is working within a color to make it that color. And that's mostly just a matter of practice. So that I know is going to go darker. But this is a good start here so far for into that ear. And around the top of the ear, see, this is where it gets kind of fun. So I'm going to take some of that brown, red, and then it actually gets more orange. Not that orange. It's not that far off, but it's not that orange. So I have now an orange that's too orange, and I want to knock it back into the brown earth tone. And I actually think if I'm looking at my colors that maybe this burnt umber will do it, because it also has sort of yellow undertones, but it's still a bit warm. A little bit more brown in there. So I think that's got it there. So it's a little bit more saturated than this other mix that we made. And I actually feel like for this, I'm going to take another brush that's more for detail, just because it's a small space, so I'll just take this Simply Simon's One Round. And I'm just gonna, it's dry, you can see, I didn't wet it yet, but I just want to pull this out. So this is another way you can sort of dry brush technique, is to create something that is wet, and then take a brush that is dry and just pull the pigment out, and it kind of helps to sort of move it across your page in a very soft way. And I just added some water because it's going to fade out into yellows here. It was just damp though, but I'm just going to pull those pigments away to create that sort of very soft transition in there. Inside this ear here, it gets dark and even more red, so I can actually take some of this color that we just mixed up. Actually, I'll take some of this. So this is where it gets a little bit more like a blood red color. Let's see. And that is quite an opaque. There's a lot of white in this color I can see, so it's a little bit opaque for what I want. But I do want, that's where maybe my cadmium will come in. And that's, the cadmium is a little bit too orangish, so I will add a little bit of yellow into this mix. And maybe a little bit more of this. And I think that that's a good tone, or good color for in here. So this just is going to lay, oh, it's not quite dark enough. When I put it next to that, it needs to be a bit darker. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of those colors. That's better. It needs to be more saturated and darker than what I just laid down. There's going to be a yellow transition in there. This is a little bit too yellow, but I think I can work with it. That was actually the color that I was wanting right there. For some reason it came out quite yellow from my brush, but I will just do that. And then this down here, it transitions more out of that color and into this more brown color. So I'm just going to pick some more of that up and then drag these together. Yours are hard because there's small spaces and there's a lot going on usually. It's a lot of subtle color and light transitions. So I'm going to leave this like this for now, just to let it sort of settle. And pull those together a little bit. That's too much, but I will go back in with those darks. I just want to create space for that little highlight that's got to be in there. And it's a soft line, so I can let these edges sort of bleed together. Okay, let's work on the eyes a little bit more. So I am going to take a very fine little brush. I just grabbed the Raphael Precision 2.0. Nice tiny little thing. I always want to do this on my images now, on my paintings, because we're so used to doing that on computers. So I'm going to take a little bit of the Payne's Gray and Moon's Glow, and with a fairly dry brush, or a dry brush, I'm just going to go and add a little bit more shadow into here. That needs to be very soft. I can just kind of dab a little bit of it away. And then up into here, sometimes if I'm not sure, sometimes with photography and like what you get is small and low resolution, and then there's all the light happening in the image, and sometimes you just really can't tell what color someone's eyes are. In that case, I just ask my clients, and I sometimes get them to provide a couple extra photographs to me so that I can accurately depict their eye color, because if you can't see it, you won't know. This is just sort of stock imagery right now, so I can't really write to the parents. I'm not using actual client children for these demos because of privacy issues. So that's one little thing where I'm just gonna have to make it up as I go along. A little bit. And I think I will add the dark people right now, just so that I can get that out of the way. And I've kind of overdrawn where it goes accidentally, so it's not quite as big as what I had it. And it is actually a sunny day, so your pupils are smaller because of the light. And it will look a little bit funny for now. Because everything else is now much too light around it, but we will fix that. So I've got a couple of these really nice colors mixed up that are really close to what we need. So I'm just going to grab them off that paper there and just come in and darken under that crease. And this side, on this side, it's a little bit more yellow. This side is already a little bit darker for me, but I'm going to add just a little bit more. I'm going to watch the way colors turn across surfaces. This has a little bit more pinkish to it, which means I would add a little bit of maybe it's like a cooler blue. I'm gonna say this color, just like a cooler, more blue red with some white. But it also has some of these brown tones, so I'm gonna add some of those in to it. Because this part of the lid here is a little bit darker. I already had it a little bit on that side. Alright, so from here I'm going to take a small brush again, maybe my Simon 1, and I'm going to do a little bit more color on these lips. So let's say they're kind of like, this is actually kind of perfect for the first little layer. It's just sort of like an earthy red that's got a little bit of yellowness to it. And I've got a little bit of that cooler mix just next to it, so I'm just going to add a little bit more of this in here. And then just take a little bit of fluid on my brush, not wet, but just a bit damp, and just kind of blend out that little area. I did forget a nostril. It's sort of in these reddy brown tones that I have pre-mixed. So his nose currently looks a little bit funny. And just a little bit of shadow under the nose here. Oops, not too much though. So I'm just going to dab that out. You can dab with your finger. I'm going to have to go darker into this nostril here, but I'll do that a little bit later. Alright, so his ear here has some yellowness to it. I'm just going to take some of this yellow that I have mixed, and I'm going to add this in, and I'm going to allow these edges to soften just by kind of working back over them. Kind of soften all this up. And I am going to need to clean up sort of this area where I had some extra sort of spillage. So I can do that. I can do that just by adding water and then dabbing away. And some more of my ashy brown color. This whole area gets progressively darker. And I'm going to remove most of it and just go really, really light on this color. And just allow a little bit more darkness, but very soft under the chin here. And around that ear. I have some of these pinks mixed, and I actually see that there's a perfect space across the chin, so it kind of goes cool and then warm again. So I'm just going to add some warmth into here. I may have to go a little bit darker in that purplish shadow, but that's okay, because we do work light to dark. A little bit of kind of a pinkish, very close to white transition in this area, so I'm just going to sort of soften these by just working the edges and adding a tiny bit of color to it. It's a sort of soft pink. Some of my edges are a little bit harsh at the moment, so I can just work them by using a damp brush and some circular motions. Same in here, this is much too harsh, so I'm just going to work this out. And I'm just kind of lifting some of this color off, so there's a bit on my brush. I'm just going to transition it up into here. This area needs more of that purpley blue color. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of it into here. It's a bit too much. Put it down, there we go. And I need some more yellow. Oops. I've got some on my palette here on my mix area. It's going to come up into his eyebrows where there's some bounce light in there. Lots of soft little washes. I'm essentially just trying to follow the shape of his bone structure and follow how the light is working and falling across his face. So There's a lot of warm, cool transitions that you have to pay attention to while you're doing that. So warm colors are obviously to the red and yellow spectrum, and then cool colors are to the blue spectrum, so anything that's in purple towards blue. And then within that, there are obviously a lot of variations, like a purple could either be a warm purple or a cool purple. So it could have either more red in it, or it could have more blue in it. So I never pick just like a purple, for example. I will pick a purple with the undertones that I need to get the job done. So is it more of a red or more of a blue? Is it more saturated or less saturated? Is it brighter in value or is it darker in value? These are all questions that I ask myself while I'm looking at something in painting. This needs to go a lot darker in here. And actually, it should be a little bit more orange. I'm just going to add that to my brush now. Kind of a hot sort of pink area in through here. There's a lot of color variations across his eye here. And then there's like a soft purple red. And it's kind of to the blue spectrum. It's too cool. I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium red to it. Make it a little bit warmer. There we go. This whole part of his face in here. Whoops! That's too much pigment and not enough water. Created myself a cauliflower just there. It's alright, I will get rid of it. Pull some of this pigment out here. Alright, little cauliflower up here. I'm going to just deal with that right now by just pulling this out. The nose on this boy is quite tough. Alright, I'm going to go back to the hair. So I'm going to take my 3.0 Soft Aqua, and I'm going to use some more, let me see, some more ashy brown. So this is a pretty good place to start. And I'm just going to start laying it in where some of his hairs are that color essentially. Some areas are fully dark here, so I can sort of work my way up through my value range. There's a lot of different colors coming in here, but I just want to give an overall darker area, but I'm leaving some places for some of these other colors that I see. For example, back in here, I see more of like maybe a Payne's gray. And I'm gonna mix it with a bit of my brown, just to get a little bit of that tint in there. This sometimes takes more than one layer or two. You don't have to go to your full darkness immediately. And then as I work over to this way, for example, in this area, I'm seeing more of like purple grays. So this is where I can bring in that moon glow and get some purple washes through here. It's a bit like negative painting where I'm trying to paint only the shadows and keep the highlights, but because some are on top of others, you kind of have to keep track of both at the same time. It can be a little bit of a challenge. That's why masking fluid can be your friend in a lot of cases, because then you don't have to worry about it. You can concentrate only on your lights first and then draw those in, and then go back and concentrate only on your darks while you're painting, and it kind of removes the mental load of having to work those two at the same time. I do want to just kind of get that turning of form across his head here. So, excuse me. I'm allowing this to be a little bit more of a wet on wet technique right now, and that is helping these colors just sort of softly blend together. And grab some of these warmer tones. A little bit darker in here anyways. That's a little bit much. I'm going to go back and erase some of this after I lost some of my lights in there. Alright, so I'm going to go back to the eyes. There are some warm but sort of ashy browns up toward the top of the eyeball here. So I'm taking my very small detail brush And I'm going to work that in across there. And then across the bottom, I'm going to actually add some of this beautiful moon glow. I'm going to leave this fairly light though, because there is an area of light coming through here. So we'll stay quite light for now, and then I will add in some darker shadows and details. And I needed to go darker into that nostril, so I'm just going to take some of my brown and gray mix and just very gently drop it into the deeper part of the nostril here, just to give that look that it's going deeper. So if I jump back to the ear, as I mentioned, I had to clean up some of this area. I don't like this edge, it's too strong, so I'm just going to take some water and just like go over it a couple times just to release some of the pigment, and then dab it. I can darken again, but it was just, I didn't like the type of edge that it created. I'm also going to take my smaller brush, looking at the ear anatomy. This little part here kind of connects around to this little part, so I'm going to take this and just kind of scrub out this area, and take my paper towel and dab this. And this might take a little bit of a work. You want to be gentle because you don't want to damage the paper. And if you scrub it too hard or too much, it can damage the paper. I'm actually going to take my really small brush to really get in and be accurate. There we go. So I want this to be soft, but I need a little bit of a highlight in here. There we go. Alright, and then I'm going to take some of these darker colors that I had mixed. This is some of the browns that are a little bit more earthy. I do need a little bit of red in there though, so I'm going to actually take maybe this one. And a little bit of water. I don't want it to be too wet and I don't want it to be too dry brush. So I want it to be a bit soft. But I'm going to go in and finish off some of that more subtle ear anatomy in here. In there it gets fairly dark, so I'm just going to let that kind of spread out a little. And then again, I need a warmer brown, maybe with some red tones in it. so that I can get into some of these areas that curve underneath. And I need some yellow color for the bounce light for this area. Let's add a bit of reds to it. There's a little part that divots in here. This is a little bit more pinkish to it, so I'm going to add some of these colors to that yellow. This doesn't need to be so light because it does recede back a little bit, but it does need that highlight. Same with in here, it doesn't need to be so light. And then I need to go over the top again where it folds over this edge here. And I could actually add some more red to that. And I'm actually going to take some of this color and go around his mouth again in this area where it gets a little bit more shadowed and darker. This little area is a little bit too dark for me, so I'm just going to take some of my water here and give that a gentle little scrub, and then take my paper towel and dab that away. So I'll go back to the eyes. I'm going to mix up, oh, I've already got some here, some of my gray and purple mix with my very small brush. And I am going to darken some of these areas. Just watching some of the highlights across the eye. You want to watch the values. it's too dark, then I will just touch it with my paper towel. And then I think I need to go a little bit darker in those brown bits that are at the top. Just testing my color there, but over here it's like a little bit more in shadow. And then of course, if we're doing this, the pupil needs to get quite a bit darker. So our eyes are drawn to detail and contrast. Well, okay, it's contrast. So it could be contrast of anything. So in this case, if I want to draw attention to his eyes, I need to put the most detail and saturation in those areas. You can also draw attention with saturation. So if you want someone to look at something specific, all other things being equal, you could bring impact and focus to that just by playing with the saturation. So you could desaturate a lot of the colors around your subject and then allow that to go to full saturation. So both of those things, or all of those things, and all of those things, especially if you use them together, can create a lot of drama and focus and impact in your work. Not easy stuff to master, and it's not easy stuff to master altogether. I feel like it sort of happens in, I guess, layers. I think usually artists first learn the contrast and value, and then maybe detail, and then color. And I think that's sort of typically the way it goes. So right now, because I've darkened these areas and put a lot more detail, they really stand out, and I haven't even done his little eyelashes yet. So I'm just going to take some of this brown, because the little eyelashes are brown, on my very small little brush, and just kind of hint at some little lashes here. So I'm going to do the main ones first, because I've got more paint on my brush. But as it wears off, I'm going to go and do the other lashes, because then I'll have less paint on there, so they will be less less intense. So I can make more of like a little clump. So yeah, I'm going to take some of this and add quite a bit of water so it's really watered down. And I'm just going to fill in sort of, okay, well that might be a little bit much. Need a little bit of color in there. And fill in some of these clumps. And he has eyebrows. They're nice and light, so I'm just going to darken a bit with this mix. And just hint at a few little eyebrow hairs. Paying attention to the direction that eyebrow hairs normally go. Sometimes just this will make it so you can finish your painting. If everything else stays sort of under painted, I guess, just adding in these details can really make it look like it's finished. I won't leave it like this though. There's a few other things I want to do, but we kind of, I think, are already sort of starting to see the idea. There's still a lot of value work that I feel I need to do here. So I'm just taking this really light paint mix here, and I'm just like very carefully darkening in areas where I see that I need to darken a little bit more within this color range. So I'm just kind of using what I already have on my brush to my advantage. And right now it's mostly just about checking values. And like I said, I know that I needed to darken in the cool colors under the chin here. And so there's some of this blue in that, and probably a little bit of purple. And I think maybe I can add, oops, a little bit of moon glow. That was way too much. I'll water it down. It's going to be way too dark. There we go. And I need some of these oranges. And actually, this side, the sun comes through it, so I'm actually going to use some of my really bright orange in there. And while that dries, I will do a little bit more of his hair color, so maybe a little bit of Naples yellow. That was a bit too much, but I do need some of that color there, so I'm just going to dab a bit of that off. Again, a little bit much. I want that to be subtle. I don't like how this kind of blended here, so I'm just going to clean this out with just some water on my brush. Just soften that. And then dab. Okay, so across his face, it's still a little bit too bright. Trying to figure out what color. So there's a lot of color going on. There's like blues and oranges and pinks. This is actually not a bad pink tone. It's kind of going across his nose. And then it's over here. And I want to create some little peaches for up in here to go a little bit darker. So I might take some of this earth tone that I've mixed and I'm going to add maybe a little bit of a red blue to it. And then a whole bunch of white and also maple yellow to bring that sort of yellowness to it. A little bit more white. Yeah, that should be good. Maybe a little bit more pink. Whoops, that was way too much. Sometimes it goes really far or really fast. There we go. That's a good color. So I just laid in a bunch of color. It was too strong. So I just took a damp brush and then moved it across. I still have a bit of color in the brush, but not as much. And I'm just gonna, and then here I can go darker because this is gonna be a bit in shadow. And so down the side of his face here, there's a little bit more color where it turns under. That is all too much, so I will just dab some of that off. There's a little bit that's going to come across in here. Deepen some of the peach tones in his face here. Alright, and then in the neck area, I'm going to add a whole bunch of this in. So this can come underneath because there's a little bit of light hitting his chin there, so I need a separation in those colors here. Add some of this over there and let it drag out this way. I'm actually going to take this and add some of these colors on his shirt here. Some sort of bounce light happening through here. Alright, down in here it does get darker and it does change color, so I've got a bit of that color on my brush, but I'm going to sort of grab some of these pink grays, and I do need more pink in there. And it should be quite light though. We'll remove some of it, and this just comes into where the shadows under here. Wake up on his face over there. And a little bit more pink. Whoops, that's a lot. There we go. It's a bit too dark. I'm going to remove some. I removed a bit too much. You gotta be careful sometimes with the amount of water that goes down. There we go. And then I'll go in with some browns here. A little bit more burnt umber. This area got too dark and too purple somehow, so I'm just going to remove some of this paint in a circular motion and dab it. Might have been left there from earlier. But I know that I also need some of this peach color in there. So I'm going to grab some of that. And I feel the lips need to go a little bit darker. Take a small brush here. A little bit more detail and contrast. A little bit more red. Alright, I think I need a little bit more in here where his little rosy cheek is. And just like across here, it looks really hot in color. And this is all darker and warmer, so I'm actually just going to soften this whole area by adding sort of a glaze of this color over top. And it will also just kind of soften the drawing in that area. And the same over here. Just gonna add, I don't really need to do details on this ear. So we could do the arms, but they would get darker, and I think it will just draw the eye down. I'm not sure that that's the best idea, so I actually think I'm just gonna leave it like this. And oh, you know what? I'm gonna go and add a little bit more darkness to the hair. Back in here. And some browns. I think I'm going to call this done. So thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next tutorial. Bye!